Hello and welcome back. In this video, we are going to move from what we saw last time of creating classes and using these classes to build objects to discover what are constructors, why do we need them, how do we build constructor for our classes, and what is the difference between constructor with parameters and without parameters. So if you haven't watched this video on classes and objects yet, go back, stop right here, watch that video and come back. So let's say that you have a class called character, and if you need to stop the video and create this class to see how it works in your end, please do so. We have a class called character with three attributes: name, status, and health. And we have here a method called showValues that just print these variables values, right? We can call this by in another class by creating an object, right? And using the method that comes with this object to show the details value. Parentheses, of course, this variable should be private and shouldn't be accessed from other classes without an additional method that are called getters and setters. But for the sake of this video, we are gonna leave it public so that we can understand this easily. Then in the video of getters and setters, we are going to develop this in detail. Going back, so what happened is that when I call this method, the values that comes out here for this object that I am creating are the default values that Java uses. If you don't have a constructor, if you don't have something that initializes those default values, Java will build a constructor on the back end that will have the default values for each of these data types. And this is why you can see that the player one, even if it doesn't have anything here, any value, we haven't given any value to any of these variables, you can see some variables value. Of course, if you want to come and say player one and name equals to let's say Gabriel, then if I run this, the name variable will have the value of Gabriel. But these are not default value. I already have changes, right? Okay. So this is why we need constructors. We need constructors so that we have something to say about these default values that we are using to create our objects. How do we build them? And how does the compiler, the IDE, knows that this is a constructor instead of another method? This is when we need to define what are the constructors. This type of method are special and because they have the same name as the class. Here, the constructor character has the same name as the class that is called character. This is how he knows that it is a constructor. We're going to start with a constructor without parameters, and then we're going to expand this with constructors with parameters so you see the difference. For example, if I go back to my class character here, and I have my method show details only, I want to build this constructor. This constructor has the same name as we said, and it doesn't have any parameter. Instead of having these default values here, we want something else. So let's say that we want the variable name be empty, like an space or right? So now if I create this, the variable instead of having null will have an empty space. If we do the same, for health, we're going to make it, let's say 100 as default, and status as active, so we're gonna call it true. Now what happens is that when I come here and create my player one without giving values, I can have by default those new values that I assign. Yes, we can give it even here the unknown value. Okay, so these are constructor without parameters. But what happens if you want to, when you create your player here, player one, what happens if you want to actually say, no, 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 I don't want to have these values. I want to immediately give some values to the object that I'm creating. Because so far, if I want to change the name or the health or the active or the status, I will need to go one by one of the variables and change those values, right? What about if I want to do something like this? For example, I want to say that the name will be John, that the health will be 95, for example, and that the status will be true. See how I have an error here. Say, hey, wait a second. You don't have a constructor like this. You only have a constructor without parameters. Let's go ahead and build our constructor with parameters that will solve the last objective. This one, we go back to our class and say, okay, now I want to create a constructor with parameters. I will copy paste, and you will say, but wait a second, you already have a constructor here. Why are you building another constructor here? Well, it knows automatically by the pillar of OOP called polymorphism that it can select the method, even if the method has the same identifier, the same name, it select the method that you are calling by understanding what are the parameters that you are sending. For example, I cannot build this one without parameter as well. But if I say that I will have a string for name, and I will have a, let's say, an integer for help, and I will have a boolean for a status. Now, look, I don't have any error. So if I come here and call it, this even doesn't have an error now. It just have a warning. Because now it's saying, okay, when you are calling this constructor that has some parameters, I will go and find the constructor that has some parameters. Of course, they need to match, but let's keep it simple. Okay, we have this constructor and it has parameters. I don't want these values, but I want to use those arguments, because when we call it, they are arguments, those arguments that you are sending. So I say name equal to name. And here is a little bit interesting. What do you mean? Which one of these is the parameter and which one is the entity variable? Sorry, the entity variable that we have here. This brings us to very special keyword, that is this. By you writing, and this is a good practice, by you writing in front of each of the variables that are in the constructor, the keyword this, it knows that you are referring to the variables that is part of the object, the variables that is part of when you create this class here. So even if they have the same name, it can distinguish and say, okay, this one that doesn't have the this refer to the variables that we are passing. But this one that does have the this refer to the variable in the class here. And so when we are having constructor with parameter, it's good that we always have this here. We just want to change this for the value that we are passing, and we just want to change this for the value that we are passing. So now it will take each of these values and it will assign it to the variables on the class. So when I create my player 2, I can now pass these values immediately. I don't have to go one by one and changing them. So let's see that. If I say player 2 show detail, when I run, I can see I create a new player. This is player 1. It knows that it needs to use the constructor that doesn't have parameter because I'm not sending any parameter. And when I'm creating player 2 and I call the show details, it knows that I need to use the constructor with parameters because I'm sending some parameters. And before you go, one last warning. These arguments that you use when you call this constructor for creating this new object need to match the same order that is when you create your constructor. Because, for example, it's assuming or it's expecting that you're going to send a string first for name, an integer later, and a boolean after. If I change the order, for example, here, I want to send first the help because I didn't remember the order, and then the name. Look how it gives me an error here. It say, wait a second, no, look, I am expecting this. I am expecting the string first. So you need to send that string first. The other thing that will happen with this is that if you have variables of the same type, when you send the variables, if you are not keeping this order in mind, the order that is receiving it, the order that is using, then you can be assigning the values to something that you don't want. For example, let's say I have another variable here called level in the game, and is 2, and I send that in the position where I supposed to be sending the health, then it will assign the value of the level to the health value, and that is incorrect. We have built constructors. We know the difference between constructors with parameters and without parameters, and we know why we need them. Now, you try to build your class, try to use the class to create some objects, create a constructor, multiple constructor. What happens if your constructor is not full parameterized, means doesn't have all of these variables that you create, but some only? You also can do that. Try, and let's see what you get.